versus the Netflix timeline. The Papo War timeline that Rivi provides is an extensive and disturbing and violent series of events. He went to New York to kill about 12 people that were part of Papo's crew. He killed 11, and he said it would have been 12, but traffic was really bad. Papo's father was murdered at the Mall of the Americas. In June of 81 was the house bombing. Papo's mother-in-law, they kidnapped her, shot her in the head.
Pause. You got me anxious talking so many murders.
Griselda Blanco, a flamboyant woman nicknamed La Madrina, or Godmother.
A Colombian drug baroness.
A cocaine queen pin of sorts.
I would characterize her as the epitome of the Cocaine Cowboys.
Más conocida como la reina de la cocaína.
Griselda Blanco has been charged with 3 murders.
Griselda Blanco.
Griselda Blanco.
For the last 20 years, I've watched other people tell the story of my mother and our family. Now it's my turn to tell the real story.
This is The Real Griselda with Michael Corleone Blanco. I'm Billy Corben. Michael, author of My Mother, the Godmother, now available at mymotherthegodmother.com. Also repping Blanco Family Fincas and Packaging Company. Co.
Company Co. Well, mind you, my mother would be proud.
Who else you repping?
I'm repping myself. Right now, I'm racontouring with the famous Billy Corben from Cocaine Cowboy fame. It's an honor to be here. I believe it was my arch nemesis a couple decades ago, and now we're business partners. So I thank you for that, Billy.
We have to get into that,
Yeah,
I think.
the
third wars, right? The third Cocaine Cowboys.
Wars.
The fourth Cocaine Cowboys.
I want my money.
And if you get in trouble.
If you get in trouble and you need a bond man, please hit Ace Deuce Bonds. Ace Deuce will bust you loose in the state of California.
Episode 4 of Griselda on Netflix was called Middle Management. It is high batshittery. The show, I have to admit, starts to get a lot of fun in this latter half because it is gonzo Cocaine Cowboys fan fiction. So even though the timeline's off, the real life timeline, I should say, is off from the jump of this series. But now it's just totally just out there. And the show, the latter half of the series, it kind of forms its own fun, almost sci-fi narco world. Yes. And it has like an internal logic entirely separate from the real Griselda's like real life timeline, but it's still like entertaining in its own right. And shit that goes down, they basically take 3, maybe 4 years worth of events, and they not just pack it into this hour, but this episode takes place in like probably a matter of days or weeks. And so they have shit that goes down. It's now firmly 1980, and we know this because it opens Scarface style with the Mariel boat lift. But the Dadeland shooting hasn't happened yet. And
which I believe happened in 1979.
July 79. So July 79 is Dadeland. Mariel starts in April of 80. And we're now in April of 80, and Dadeland hasn't happened yet in the world of the show. Yet also at the end of episode 3, you had Amilcar getting busted.
Rafael Amilcar Rodriguez, step out of the vehicle.
By, I guess, I don't even know if SENTAC existed yet in the world of the show, but in real life, so here, let me just set the real life timeline so you and I can have a conversation about the real Griselda.
You mean the timeline that's in that book right there?
The timeline that is in My Mother, the Godmother, now available at mymotherthegodmother.com.
The true life story of Michael Corleone Blanco.
The real
Griselda. That's me.
December of 1980 is when Raul Diaz wrote up the proposal paperwork for SENTAC 26.
I wrote up the concept paper for SENTAC sometime around December of 1980. SENTAC stands for Central Tactical Unit.
That was to be made up of local police and federal officials in trying to crack down on what they were calling Latin drug-related homicides, which they were not having a lot of luck in solving. They kind of had a loose group of homicide detectives in Metro Dade or Dade.
Local, yes.
Yeah, Dade County cops. who had survived the 1979 cocaine cops scandal, where all the top brass in homicide were busted in a big corruption scandal involving cocaine and drug dealers.
The Cocaine Cops raises a number of chilling questions about Dade County law enforcement.
These folks who got indicted were the most experienced homicide investigators.
So all of a sudden, we became the senior detectives in the Bureau. And that is what you call real on-the-job training.
They're trying to figure this all out. They propose this SENTAC in part because of the Dadeland murder. Raul Diaz proposes SENTAC in December of 1980. Then what happens is almost a year later, November of 81, not only does the homicide rate go up, you had Mariel in 1980, the McDuffie riots in 1980. So, and then in November of 81, you have the Time Magazine Paradise Lost cover, which is the name of like episode 5 of this show.
Yeah, I believe there's one of her compinches is reading the article.
That happens, and then within weeks, SENTAC 26 goes fully operational because everybody starts flipping out. All the tourist
they
people
brought the planes in. They were, that's it. You couldn't get Cessnas in through the Everglades. Shit hit the fan. That's
when they bust Amilcar.
Their biggest catch so far is Rafael Leon Rodriguez, known as Amilcar.
There is a shootout like there is, or an exchange of gunfire, we'll say, like there is at the end of episode 3. Rivi is in the car with Amilcar. That's not true. Rivi did not know Amilcar have a relationship. And then Amilcar basically kind of gave up, and there was a ton of guns in the car.
This man had a Mac-10, Mac-11, a Smith & Wesson Model 59. This guy had 148 rounds.
Almost war wagon style. So that's the thing, is SENTAC was a reaction to the Dadeland shooting, the Marielitos, the violence, and ultimately the Time Magazine cover. That gets a little lost in the Netflix series timeline. So I just wanted to clarify that, because now in episode 4, everything's going to happen. Mariel's going to happen. Dadeland's going to happen. The Papo War kicks up. Griselda is pregnant with Michael Corleone. Again,
born 1978.
I talk about Griselda. I don't mean your mom. I mean the Griselda of this show and the Michael Corleone of the Netflix series. And you and I will talk about the real people, obviously, you and your mother and your family. But timeline's a little wonky.
Yes.
She's pregnant in the show years later than you were actually born, of course. Right. So now that we're kind of caught up with the real timeline versus the Netflix timeline, what were your thoughts on this one? Things you liked about this one. Do you remember this one?
I kind of do remember it. And I'm not going to say it was that bad. It was all right. Could have been better if they followed the timeline.
Well, they would have also needed more time because the writers had said this was originally supposed to be a 10-part series, which I think it probably would have benefited from that extra runtime.
Of course, because you would have had, if you're going to compress 3 decades into a series, 10 episodes would be correct. Somewhat correct, or multiple seasons.
I don't even know where to start. Let's start with Dadeland, because they kind of, again, like conflate all these issues here. And they try to do it like in Godfather style. Like they want to montage like multiple hits happening at the same time to kind of illustrate that there's a war going on here. But she's at war with Papo in this episode. She's at war with the Ochoas.
Which is true. The Ochoas wasn't a thing, and there really wasn't an ongoing war. You can read about it in the book, or maybe you and I could tell a story about that later. She was already at war with Papo Mejia. That was an ongoing war that we had from Colombia. And then later on, if you read my book, it was part of a later thing that happened in the early 2000s. And, he was, like I say, Papo Mejia was really a rock in our shoe for decades, more than that, But, yeah, she was already at war with him, and they were already starting the second wars. So it was at war with everybody, basically.
They wanted war. So Griselda took the first step.
What I do like about that episode is the impact of Los Marielitos. Because to me, that's a story that has just been touched upon a little.
Ustedes y yo tenemos el mismo problema. Cuando yo entro en algún lugar, yo lo único que soy es una mujer. Donde ustedes entran, ustedes lo único que son es unos Marielitos.
By that time, Chiqui was coming into being the #1 earner in my family. So Chiqui later on takes all the Marielitos with him as well. So then the Marielitos become Chiquis Marielitos, and Rivy becomes Chiquis Rivy.
But in this show, she kind of has an army, like a literal army of Marielitos, and like there's no less than she gives them 3 speeches in like the last half hour of this episode.
Motivational speeches.
Yeah, like
right before she burns the 1,000 kilos.
So, no, it is thousands. It looks like that. I couldn't. I zoomed in and tried to count them, but don't. You spoil it. You're spoiling the ending of the episode again. But so. There was not an army of Marielitos, though, that on pickup trucks that she would speechify to like that. I mean,
you know what? My dad had a thing that he knew how to run bandidos, because when you're from the streets or when you've been around enough criminal people, it gets to the point that some criminals stop respecting their bosses. I'm such a killer. I'm such a monster. Why do I have to respect my boss? He's soft. He's only hard because he made $100 million selling cocaine, but he's not a killer like me. I could take it from him. And I guess my mother understood that. One of her favorite phrases to me was, hey, don't be like your brother Cheeky. Yeah, there's no friends in the streets. And that stuck with me so long because I understood that true loyalty can't be bought, but loyalty can be bought to an extent. Because if you don't know how to run these criminals and be a savage like them, then the natives will rebel. And I guess that's what my mother and my brothers were so good at. Then again, they also had a lot of loss. When soldiers start dying, you need new soldiers. So they were good at reinventing our security detail, and my mother's shooters and hitters, or my brother and my father's enforcers. I guess they really knew how to capitalize off that. And the Mariel was just so easy for them to do it. I remember seeing Miguelito all the time.
Miguelito, yes. This is a picture that was taken of him shortly after he arrived here in 1980 from the Mariel boat lift.
He just was a thug. And he was one of the scariest guys I've ever really encountered in my career.
All the time, may he rest in peace. Matter of fact, his nephew just passed away a couple months ago. May he rest in peace too.
Is Miguel dead?
Yeah, Miguelito's dead, and his nephew just died. He's splitting image. He was my bodyguard last year at a cannabis thing that we did.
So I know that the Papo Mejia War is kind of a perennial that goes on and on and on. But in terms of this chronology, let's start with the Dadeland Crown Liquors shooting. It was a double homicide. It was what Al Singleton in the first Cocaine Cowboys documentary calls the first public shot in the cocaine wars.
But certainly Dadeland really was the defining moment.
This was a situation where you had high noon, busy shopping mall in the summer, moms, children, people walking around.
The shootout occurred at about 2:30 this afternoon when 2 or more Latin males entered the Crown Liquor Store here on the west end of the Dadeland Mall. They were followed by 2 or 3 other Latin males, and then the shooting began.
This war wagon, the Party Time 40 Econoline van, pulls up on this liquor store next to the Cazzolis at Dadeland, a mall that is still very much around and very popular.
Kendall.
They pull up with an arsenal
Yes.
that petrified the cops at the time because they were carrying 6 shooters.
Yeah, like 38 specials with the snub nose and 38 longs, while my mother's people were already equipped with war guns, bulletproof vests. Back then, that was hardly ever seen.
And firing hundreds of rounds just to kill one guy and his bodyguard. This was a
sad day in Kendall. Not to glorify it too much, that was a sad day.
And a sobering moment for a lot of people, which is why it paved the way for SENTAC, who also went fully operational with fully automatic weapons, the first cops possibly in the country.
They started having M16s and Uzis and Ingrams, just like my mother and her soldiers. I guess that day, Miami local PD and every special agent that was here in Miami realized there was something different about this violence. Who'd have the balls to commit such a act of war? And it was, the Blancos. Griselda Blanco cartel. From that day on, Miami would never be the same.
But you could argue that the country would never be the same, because when people talk today about the militarization of police forces, and you see tanks, rolling on the street from local police departments, cops dressed up in flak vests with, holding machine guns, that really starts with SENTAC. That really starts with the Miami-Dade Police Department, or then Metro-Dade Police Department. SENTAC going fully operational with machine guns, a local police department, was in direct response to what they were calling the Latin drug-related homicides, a lot of which was being fueled at that time by not just your parents.
but every other drug dealer in town, Billy. I mean, we had the Cuban Godfathers, we had the Capos, the Venezolano, El Chamo, and it wasn't only the Blanco clan. Rafico had a whole crew that they were enemies of my mother's Marielitos and enemies of my mother's Pistoleros. They were called Los Chicos Malos. And they were from the same exact neighborhood that my mother and Rafico were from. So they knew the ongoings. They knew stash houses. They knew everything. What were they popular for? Robando las caletas, robbing the stash houses. They never, you don't see too much speak about them. You don't see too many articles talking about this group that stole thousands of kilos from their own network, but they existed.
As police begin to study these shootouts, they are seeing a pattern. Many of the killings and killers are related. For example, police believe the Dadeland shootout was simply Paco Sepulveda's payback for another incident here on the Florida Turnpike.
What do you know about the Dadeland Crown Liquor shooting? What it was about? There's the story about kilos that got stolen from Paneso, and his housekeeper was murdered. That guy was found in the trunk of one of the cars in the, I believe he might have been one of your dad or your mother's associates. He's found in the trunk of a car after the Turnpike shooting. That was in April of '79, and then 3 months later, the Dadeland shooting happens, which we understand was in retaliation for that murder. Is that as you understand it?
Yeah,
I know.
From what I understand, it was in direct retaliation to that. The shootout started here from Brickell. And it went all the way down the Turnpike. They said they shot it out for like 20 minutes. The helicopters were on. One of my uncles was the target, or was in one of the cars in the Turnpike shootings. And he later on died in a hotel here on US 1. They said he committed suicide, but
he was the youngest brother, wasn't he?
He was like 23, I think. The story goes, he was cocking the gun, a bullet fell, and he fell to pick up. Rivy goes to pick up the bullet, and then Diego shoots himself in the head. 23-year-old boy.
You don't think that happened?
No, I don't think that happened. I don't think that happened.
What do you think happened?
I'd rather not say. But
you think Rivy killed him? Why would Rivy kill him?
When you have animals in a fucking cage and they've been smoking bazooka for 3 days, and savages fear death too. And maybe I'm gonna kill you before you kill me. It's the way of the wild, right?
Rivy was able to confess to a lot of murders, men, women, and children, because he had a plea deal with the Miami-Dade County State Attorney in order to cooperate against your mother to avoid the death penalty 3 times. For the 3 homicides he was charged with, the Lorenzos and Johnny Castro, which we'll talk about later. Rivy tells the story of the death of your uncle, Diego Sepulveda, as a suicide in this hotel room in Fort Lauderdale, because that was in that was in Broward County. Rivy
didn't have to deal with the county.
Yeah. Did not have a plea bargain with Broward County, so really could not cop to or confess to murders in Broward County because he could be charged in Broward, and that's a capital, no statute of limitations. Murder is a capital crime. He could conceivably be executed by the state of Florida for any of those crimes that took place outside of Dade County. So people going like, why would Rivy cop to some murders and not to others? That could be an explanation as to why.
Once again, I'm not saying he did it. In a wild world, what if he committed suicide?
The Papo Mejia War. This goes back to Colombia in the 70s.
Yes.
And now
he was my father's enemy before he was my mother's enemy, because they had a bit of a power struggle in Pereira. He's originally from Pereira. He lived in Pereira. His team was from the outskirts of Pereira, I think. He later on moves to Cali, and then when he gets extradited, when he gets deported, he lives in Mexico and then Colombia after.
The Papo War timeline that Rivy provides is an extensive and disturbing and violent series of events. And it spans multiple states and multiple countries, of course.
Yes.
It includes a period in which Rivy says he went to New York.
I go to New York to kill everybody that was working for Papo Mejia, all his crew.
The words that the person that I spoke to was there was going to be a bloodbath.
From the stashers to the hitmen, 11 people. They all got killed in less than 24 hours.
And he said it would have been 12, but traffic was really bad. Then you have Octavio Mejia, Papo's father, who in this episode of the Netflix show dies in a bombing.
bombing wasn't even that. It was another house, and I believe the roof landed here on I-95 when they blew it up with too much TNT. I believe Papo Mejia's father was killed differently in his car.
Papo Mejia's Octavio was murdered at the Mall of the Americas.
Basically, when Mejia left the shopping mall, they ambushed him. And he was shot numerous times by several different gunmen.
And Papo was there, but took off. In June of 81, there was a guy named Jorge Gonzalez Cabezon, apparently an associate of Papo. They followed him to a house in Key Biscayne. He wouldn't come out because he saw that he was being followed. And so the shooters took off. Later, they followed him on a motorcycle. Kumbamba was driving. Rivi was on the back with a Mac 11, but the gun jammed. And this guy, Cabezon, got away. Then in June of 81 was the house bombing, and I believe it was on Killian Parkway.
Goddamn explosion was so loud.
In March of 82, Papo's wife was giving birth at Mercy Hospital in Coconut Grove. So they were waiting outside for Papo to come out. Papo didn't come out, but his mother-in-law, his wife's mother, Marta Gomez, comes out of Mercy. They kidnap her and interrogate her to find out when Papo's going to come to the hospital or what the story is, and she didn't know. They drove her out to Pembroke Pines, shot her in the head, and dumped her, but she survived.
Pause. You got me anxious talking so many murders. Because then it's a little too much.
I hear you.
Touchy subject, and then when you're mentioning so much murders, I don't want to be mentioning murders or saying stuff that people might take the wrong way that are still alive, family members or so on, that live here in the community.
The war was picking up again, and this time was in Colombia.
It seemed in Colombia, Rivi and Griselda's enforcers had access to significant hardware. I mean, they're talking about fighting with grenades and machine guns. I mean,
yeah.
That's accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. 100%. Even here, we would cross Biscayne Bridge. Chiqui, I think, had a bulletproof Toyota Land Cruiser. It was similar to a Land Cruiser. My cousin's mother would sometimes have to go turn on the car. My brother would tell her, look, every time you switch that key on, I'll give you $1,000, go downstairs, you turn on the car. In case that bitch would blow. He didn't want his wife, he didn't want her sister or anybody of us to turn on the car or any of the drivers. He said, you think it's funny, right, that we're at war? Because, tough lady. You got balls? Yeah. Every time you go turn on that car, I'll give you $1,000. Wherever it's parked, you turn it on, just in case there was a bomb. He would cross this bridge right here, Rickenbacker Causeway, in a fleet of motorcycles, Lamborghinis, bulletproof Lands, and in one of the Lands, we had a bazooka in the back because Rafico had a bazooka too. So Chiqui, at the age of 17 and 18, was starting an arsenal preparing for war as if we were living in a third world country. So imagine what they did in Medellin.
Yeah, I was in Colombia looking for Papo. Rafico answered the phone, talked to somebody on the phone, then he says, we know where he's at. I said, who? He said, Papo.
In Colombia, in late August, beginning of September 1982, Rivi is there, throws a grenade at Papo Mejia.
It was about 10 of them. It was about 10 of us. We killed about 3 of them. It went on for about an hour.
Mejia gets away, but he's injured either by the grenade or a gunshot wound to the leg, I believe. And then it is September 15th, 1982, that he returns.
Airport.
Yes, sir. On an Avianca flight from Colombia to Miami International Airport. In the Netflix show, he is departing with his father's ashes, which is not accurate. In real life, he was coming back into the country, and as he came through customs is when Miguel Perez met him with...
From the back, stabs him with the bayonet.
With the bayonet.
16-inch bayonet. They call him the pig. She wanted him killed like a pig.
About 10 times.
I mean, everybody in the airport was like, with their mouths open, like this. Because everybody's in shock. Nobody's saying nothing. Drops on the floor, and he takes off running. That's when everybody starts screaming.
And still doesn't kill him.
In the series, you don't hear from Papo again. I don't know if they say that he's dead, but he's out of the picture. But Papo, in fact, did survive.
I think he got the angle wrong, honestly.
10 times?
Yeah, but I think that I don't want to say it, but I think if he would have yoked him right, or if he would have attacked from a frontal view, he could have probably finished the job.
Louis Casuso told me a really interesting story. Casuso was a criminal defense attorney.
Oh, he had a big reputation for representing Colombians.
In Miami at the time, there was a finite number of guys that were bilingual and that could kind of, talk the talk, walk the walk, and kind of help the clientele that was around and paying cash, I guess, at the time. So Casuso, I don't know if he's someone you remember from your childhood at all, but it seems like he was hired often by your mother to handle things that would come up with the enforcers, or whether it was drug related, or in this case, an attempted murder charge against Miguel Perez.
You're talking about the lawyer.
The lawyer,
yes.
Louis Casuso, yeah.
Okay.
And Casuso told a story that was not in, I don't think it was in any of the docs. Griselda calls him in real life. Your mother calls him and says, I'd like you to represent Miguel Perez. He was arrested at the airport for attempted murder of Papo Mejia. And Casuso says, well, there's a conflict. I also represent Papo Mejia. And he said, but I could ask Papo if he would waive the conflict of interest and allow me to represent the man charged with his attempted murder. And your mother says, ask him.
You know what's a beautiful thing about my mother? Her dark humor that she always had.
Casuso goes to the hospital where Papo Mejia is recovering from 10 stab wounds and says, hey, the reason you're here with 10 stab wounds is because of this guy, Miguel Perez, who was arrested, and I've been asked to represent him, to defend him for attempting to murder you. But I can't unless you waive the conflict. And Papo says, I waive the conflict, and you tell Miguelito that I hope you get him off.
So I can kill him. That's what he said?
Yeah. He's like, because this justice system in this country is bullshit. So you beat the system, and just let him know when he walks out that door, justice, real justice will be waiting for him.
You know how they say respect thy enemy? That motherfucker was something.
If you don't mind, I kind of want to, since we're jumping around the timeline anyway, I want to flash forward a bit, because how and when does the Papo Mejia story end? You said this guy was a rock in the shoe of your family for 3 decades. This is 1982. He survives.
Well, just to fill in a lot of pockets that this series left out, and maybe even the Cowboys left out, Papo Mejia is released in, I think it's 1999, getting to the year 2000, something like that.
What does he get busted for? Is it trafficking?
No, he was still, remember, he was still incarcerated from when he got arrested. When he's in the hospital, he's arrested because he was a fugitive of the law.
Oh, okay.
So he has a charge, he has, a conviction that he's doing, then he gets released. And by that time we were waiting for him in Colombia. If he would have got off the plane, we would have known. My brother Uwit and my brother Dixon, my brother Chico was already dead. My brother Uwit and my brother Dixon, they were in alarm because they knew he was coming home. He's smart. So instead of going straight to Colombia, he goes to Mexico under the green light of somebody in Mexico, I don't know who. And he stays in Mexico. But he wants to get back to Colombia, get back to all his assets, go see his family or whatever. And he basically orders the assassination of my brother Uwit. And then my brother Uwit is killed early 2000.
Let's take a break. So obviously Michael was overcome with emotion there, talking about the murder of his brother. He's back. Your hand looked a little shaky. You okay?
Yeah. That murder talk, I really don't like it too much. And my brother was my best friend.
Have you ever, there was, of course, stories about what happened to your brothers in Colombia. Have you ever talked about that publicly before?
No. It's in my book, but it's the first time I acknowledge it publicly. Yeah, that motherfucker was a rock in our fucking shoe for decades. Fucking hate the bastard. May he rot in hell.
We spent a lot of time, obviously, documenting your mother's life. The Papo Mejia War plays a very significant part of that story in Miami, in Colombia, New York. This is the first time that I'm learning that the story goes on, or that war goes on for as long as it did, and that the casualties continued.
Yeah, I was there in Medellin. I buried my brother. Yeah, he did that, and hey, that's what's so sad about the drug game, and that's what's so sad about fucking narco wars and stuff like that, you know. But yeah.
How old were you?
That just happened in the year 2000. I want to say I was 22. Yeah, I was there. I buried my brother. Sad thing to lose 22 members of your family. Ace Deuce will bust you loose.